Many researchers were interested in finding some patterns, some connectivity structure of the people who have trauma. So that better understanding of normal brain connectivity and traumatized brain connectivity could give us more information of how we can treat the trauma. We know that particular regions of the brain are linked to specific functions, so that if we see some abnormal activity in that regions, we can link them to existing functions at normal brains and say, for example, default mode network of the brain, which is at healthy people is functioning when you're just doing nothing or just no active brain functioning, is that kind of activity. But when you measure it from people with trauma, you can recognize like that from one participant to another, they share different patterns. Like, for example, in real studies about default mode network, which consists of these 3 brain regions, people with trauma, childhood trauma or PTSD have decreased activity than healthy controls. So that brain connectivity is a measure of brain functioning which we can assess using common ways such as functional magnetic resonance imaging or EEG electroencephalogram. So these ways help us to search how signals are spread inside the brain. In some sense, in some way, we can look inside the brain and guess at some point of accuracy how the signals are spread from one brain region to another. Observing the correlations and other metrics of activity, we can see how the brain functioning works. So researchers identified several measure brain networks which are active while participant doing some tasks or not doing anything like resting state and so on. And in the context of trauma, we can highlight several of them. It's emotional regulation, it's executive function, it's salience network, it's default mode network, and context processing. Hyperactivity of default mode network could be a neural correlate of hypervigilance and being extra cautious, searching for dangerous situations. And the staying hyperactive default mode network could identify that the trauma symptoms are still persisting, especially this threat recognition one. And another finding showed that the problem with PTSD, when you don't provide a correct context processing. So imagine that you are in a zoo and you see a lion and you know that there is a cage between you and lion. So you are not afraid at that much sense as you can be afraid as you are in a jungle with a lion beside you. So that trauma works like this. It never does correct the context processing. So it seems like you never has this cage between you and the lion. It seems like the threat is everywhere at any time searching for you. Another interesting finding is about resting state from individuals who had childhood abuse. They have much lower resting state activity, so that their brain is functioning differently than healthy brain. And also there is an evidence that different kinds of maltreatment like sexual abuse or neglect or some violence could affect the abnormalities of the brain differently. So for example, if you lost some memories of your traumatic experience, even after many years passed, if we conduct a neuroimaging study of your brain functioning at resting state, we could see the particular brain regions connected to different types of maltreatment. Another finding is that childhood trauma actually affects executive function, and executive function is very important ability to plan, to do some actions one by one, to maintain some activity. Moreover, high-risk drinking was associated with executive dysfunction, so that first you have some traumatic experience, then you have executive dysfunction, and then it can affect on your behavior, on high-risk drinking and high-risk behavior, and so on. And overall, I would say that even if the trauma occurred many years ago, the effect on the brain still persists. And it can be seen using some neuroimaging studies. It can be seen from the behavior, from the features of post-traumatic stress disorder, of some avoidance, of triggers, of similar situations, some nightmares, and so on. And interesting moment that using neuroimaging, sometimes we can access to that parts of the brain, to that lost memories that the participant already didn't have. So in some cases, it can be the only way to help the participant, to help the client. And also there is a nice way using neuroimaging to help people to recover from trauma using neurofeedback. So neurofeedback is a way of observing the signals and learning how to change them by your own. And if you're interested in more ways of recovering from trauma and more approved techniques, so stay tuned. There will be more information here.